It is Friday, September 6th, 2024, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast. Congratulations. My name is Wallace Smith, and regrettably, my co host is not here today, Mr. John Robinson. He is out of town on vacation, but should be back next week. But we do still have a podcast for you. Today, our topic is one that's been on my mind because of some TV shows that I've been watching with my family and such. And I want to encourage all of us in today's podcast is to keep in mind that our entertainment choices are important because in a very real way, we become what we choose to entertain ourselves with. We'll talk about that right after the music. Thank you once again, Jake and Julia. We sure do appreciate that little jingle, and it is true. I am sorry. My co-host, John Robinson, is out of town this week. He is out camping, so I feel all the more cut off. He's out there in the wilderness, alone, scared. No, I'm just kidding. He's not alone and scared. He's out with his family, but he does that every once in a while and goes out and takes vacation time and camps out in the woods, and I hope that he's had a good time. We'll ask him about that when he gets back in, and he should be back in, God willing, next week. So it is just me, and I do have to apologize. It's been a very busy week. My hope was to somehow during the week grab someone else to do this podcast with me, so it was not just me. A variety of opportunities I perhaps could have had to grab someone, but wow, it's just been a busy week, and next thing you know, the podcast is here, so you're going to have to deal with just me, and my sincere apologies for that. At the same time, I do hope the topic is of interest to you because I know it is for me. It's something that, regrettably, it has only sunk in for me. I can't say in my 50s. It definitely sank in before that, but it sank in later in life, and it did not sink in earlier in life like I wish I had. In fact, to a certain extent, I don't know that it fully sank in even as I was a young parent, though I did start to understand it, and I did start to take, I don't say advantage of it as a principle, as opposed to just sort of allowing random circumstances to determine the facts. But I don't know if I did so with the same kind of zeal that I would now if I could project what I've learned, even in the last, I don't know, 20 years or so, or 10 years or so, backwards in that time when we first started raising our children. And that is the fact that in a very real way, we become what we entertain ourselves with. I know that sounds like an odd way to say that, but there's the old phrase when it comes to food, physical food, that you are what you eat. And I didn't like that saying when I was younger because honestly, I did a terrible job of eating my vegetables and the things I know I was supposed to. My mother and father, I don't want to go into details. I love my parents very much, but they really weren't the type to sort of force that kind of thing on me. And honestly, I wish they had. I tried to learn that with my kids. We tried to make sure that even if they didn't like foods, they still tried them every once in a while. My wife was actually very accommodating for our children, and she would like to keep in mind what they like, and she'd like to make vegetables they like, and if she knew one liked one vegetable and one liked another vegetable, she'd cook a little bit of each, right? So she was just really accommodating, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, we did still have a rule, which was even if you don't like something, we are going to bring it out again later sometime, whether it's a month or whenever, and you're still going to try it. You're still going to try a little bit of that. And also, that was a great rule and so mature for the kids until the first time my wife brought cooked spinach out with the kids, and I do not like cooked spinach. And she put a little bit on my plate and said, "Well, of course, honey, we're all trying a little bit of something we don't like." And my kids were right there at the table, and my wife's there. And the last thing I wanted to do was somehow disagree with my own rule in front of my kids and sort of put out this imperious edict but that doesn't apply to me, the emperor of family Smith. So I did eat my cooked spinach. And honestly, I still didn't like it. If you love cooked spinach, that is great. I'm not trying to not cook spinach. I can already feel the concern of some of you parents out there who are thinking, oh, please don't say you don't like cooked spinach in front of my children. But let me say, our kids' taste did change. If your parents continue to have you tasting something while you're there under their roof that you don't like, it's not a bad plan. The boys, my sons did, their taste did change over time. And I will say that for my youth and growing up, where I avoided so many vegetables, my parents did not make me eat them. Once I got married and started actually having a wife who cooks very well and is able to cook a variety of dishes and introduce me to a variety of vegetables, I found I loved vegetables. Actually, I really did. I was able to overcome that. Yay. But I've gotten way off track. This idea that you are what you eat, if you think about it, literally, when you take in food, that is all your body has to build you, right? If it's steak and potatoes, hey, your body's going to take that steak and those potatoes, going to take the proteins, going to take the fats, going to take the nutrients, going to take the minerals, and it's going to break it all up and reassemble it as if it's like a giant Lego set and you've consumed it. And your body's going to take the Lego pieces and reassemble them in different ways, different allowable ways according to the laws of chemistry and biology, and is going to build you out of that. So yes, in a very real way, you are what you eat. If all you eat are bags of Cheetos from day to day, well then guess what? Your body's going to do its best to build you out of Cheetos-based building materials because that's all we have. Well, that also applies to our mind. And in a sense, in a very real way, you might consider that more important. I'm not trying to dismiss the importance of our physical diet at all. If anything, I've come to learn that more and more as time has gone on and how important that is. But when it comes to your mind, what you feed your mind is what you become. And we feed our minds in lots of different ways. Some of you listening are young adults, perhaps, or are teens, are going to school. And so you're in a classroom or you're sitting with your parents, you've got a book open. So you're feeding your mind that way. But I'd like to focus specifically on entertainment because entertainment is what we choose when we have off time, if you will. We don't have a job that's demanding of our time. We don't have a school or a teacher who's requiring us to pay attention to anything in particular. So it's like recreation time. It's what we do for with our minds. Now, I also am not trying to lean, at least in this discussion, concerning the physical things that we do. You might be involved in a sport, and that's wonderful if you are. Frankly, I really encourage being physically active. Again, when I was younger, I definitely was more physically active. I ran, in fact, I would rather run than walk. I was very active. And then later, get older, you're driving around all over the place in a car, and things happen. But at the same time, there are those that instill a love of being physical so that even when the more sedentary times come in their life, they still make time for that. And I definitely want to encourage that. I've appreciated the culture here in Charlotte. The young individuals here, younger adults, tend to get together and play volleyball. They've done ultimate frisbee. And I've really enjoyed getting to see the boys do that. And even though we homeschool, we try to make sure a certain physical education was a part of our kids' education. But I am very focused today on the mind and what you take in as entertainment. That can be music that you listen to. That can be books that you choose to read. That can be movies that you choose to watch or television shows that you choose to stream. It can be podcasts that you listen to, YouTube videos that you watch or channels you subscribe to. I want to talk about our choices in entertainment because we may wish we could just write off some of that as nothing but fun. Doesn't really impact my life other than maybe give me a chance to relax. The fact is, it always impacts our life. It's kind of like saying, hey, I ate dinner to give my body nutrients to build my body. But on Tuesday, I'm just going to eat stuff that I like. I'm not going to worry that my body's going to use it in some way because it's not. I'm just going to eat food and it's not going to affect my body in any way. Well, of course, that's ridiculous. It doesn't make a difference what you're putting in your mouth. That is what your body takes to try to make you. Well, it's the same thing with your mind. Your mind isn't designed in a sense to shut off the personality building and shut off the character building just so you can consume a bunch of content in some way and then turn back on once the content becomes meaningful. No, your mind is constantly taking in information, even if it's just mindless entertainment. Your mind is still paying attention. And in a sense, entertainment time is very much like taking your mind up to the feeding trough, if you will, and then giving it whatever it's going to feed on at that time. And there are different things we do with our entertainment, and I'm not saying that I'm not saying the categories of them are bad. We do sometimes make bad choices within those categories, but I would like to talk about that. For instance, maybe you want to look for fun in your entertainment. Well, go figure. Often that's why we call it entertaining. Oh, that was entertaining. We mean that was fun. Well, there's nothing wrong with seeking fun in general. So as one category of what we entertain our minds with, if we're looking for fun, that can be fine. Some of our favorite times are when we were having fun with some friends, watching something or listening to something. Not everything has to have, not everything has to be, say, moving you towards some kind of educational degree, or not everything has to be an example of character that we're going to follow and model our lives after. But at the same time, then we need to take care with such things. I give an example. We try not to endorse anything here on the telecast, sorry, it's occupational hazard here on the podcast, because we never know when some entertainer is going to put something out, or there's something in a movie we didn't notice that you're going to discover, and then it's like, well, why did they even say that was okay? But I'll mention, for instance, a comedian that my family and I have liked, at least his older material, and that's Tim Hawkins. He's a mainstream Christian comedian who seems to have clean material. And he's funny. We just really enjoy it. In fact, we had one long trip to Texas once, and I think we loaded up on our phone. Just album after album. He did several albums that he publishes, and he's sort of a mainstream Christian Weird Al Yankovic. He does song parodies, and anyway, really funny observations about life, and we really enjoy this. For those of you who don't know who that is, you might have heard there was one song he did that made a big splash about Chick-fil-A. It was to the tune of the Beatles' Yesterday, which some of you are thinking I haven't even heard Yesterday, which is I can't recommend the Beatles in general, but the song Yesterday is very popular. And so he wrote it, instead of Yesterday, he made Chick-fil-A, and it was quite the hit, made the rounds. And yeah, I think on the trip to Texas, I don't know how many times we listened to one or two of those albums, because they were funny and they were clean. And it wasn't necessarily some sort of a giant tower of intellect or character that we were listening. It's just humor that we found we could trust to not be offensive, and it really was just a lot of fun. There's nothing wrong with things like that occasionally. But keep in mind that just like physical food, you're putting it in your body. It is making part of you with these things, and we have to be careful. I have a few verses that come to mind when it comes to that. Like, for instance, in Proverbs and chapter 25 and verse 16. Let me get there myself. In Proverbs 25 and verse 16, I really like this verse because it kind of gives a blessing to things that can be just simply pleasant and enjoyable, but cautions us as well. In Proverbs 25 verse 16, we're told, "Have you found honey? Eat only as much as you need, lest you be filled with it and vomit." I'm not trying to be gross here on the podcast, but it's right there in the Bible. The writer of the proverb here, which I do assume this is still Solomon here. I didn't actually take a look. There are some, yes, it's Proverbs of Solomon right there in the subtitle, which is not inspired, but we'll assume it's right. "Have you found honey? Eat only as much as you need, lest you be filled with it and vomit." The fact is, honey tastes great. It's sweet. It's enjoyable, and in a lot of ways, it can be healthy. And honey can serve as an antibiotic in some ways. By the way, I'm not a doctor. This is just things I've heard before. If I'm getting it wrong, feel free to let me know in the comments on YouTube or at livingyouth.org. I'm getting it wrong, but honey has a lot of benefit to the body. It has, actually, my understanding, is certain nutrients that can be very good. It's not, say, as just quote unquote pure sweetness like, say, table sugar can be. And yet at the same time, you can't have too much. You know who has too much honey? Winnie the Pooh. And look at that figure, right? You can have too much honey, and the Bible warns you not to get too much. But kind of like what Paul asked when it comes to oxen grazing and such when they're milling the grain, do you think honey is all that Solomon is concerned about here? Anytime there's something that is a source of fun, even if it's just a pure fun, an enjoyable fun, we have to manage ourselves and make sure that we don't take in so much, because if we just focus on what's fun in our lives, we begin to become a person of lower value, a person who's losing sight of the fact that there are more important things in life than having fun. Look, also, it's not just a matter of making sure we don't do too much. It's also a matter of recognizing there are some things that we should not look to for fun. There's this wonderful statement that David makes in Psalm 101. It's just a commitment that he makes. And I honestly don't know if this was written before or after the event with Bathsheba, but I could understand the event with Bathsheba influencing such a decision. In Psalm 101 and verse 3, David says, I will set nothing wicked before my eyes. It's in the midst. He's kind of making some commitments. Like he says in verse 2, I will behave wisely in a perfect way. He's really striving to do what's right. And he says there in verse 3, I will set nothing wicked before my eyes. I hate the work of those who fall away. It shall not cling to me. He was making a commitment there. It kind of reminds me of Job, where Job talks about making a covenant with his eyes not to look inappropriately on a young woman. But here it's broader, nothing wicked before my eyes. We can have fun, but we have to be careful. We have to choose it wisely. I remember, I don't want to go into too much detail. Well, I can actually he's a popular enough comedian. He's a big name. In fact, we've even mentioned him on a podcast many podcasts ago. But I remember when I was younger, before I was baptized, at the time, Chris Rock, some of you know who that is. He's an actor, comedian. He's been involved in wholesome things in the past. I think he was in what was that cartoon? Madagascar. I was going to say Safari. That's definitely not it. Where he was the voice of the zebra, I think. But he made his mark as a comedian on the stage before Saturday Night Live or any other kind of venue that he was on, and could be pretty raunchy. He would do some pretty raunchy comedy and material. And I remember loving that when I was younger because I was unconverted, didn't really know any better. Well, okay, let me say this. I shouldn't purely say that. I did know better. Even the unconverted, even those who don't have their minds open to the truth, they often do know, in many cases, that what they're indulging in is illicit or is nasty. And honestly, that was part of the appeal when I was younger. It felt transgressive, and that was a part of the appeal. And Chris Rock was one of those comedians who would do that. There were others like him. But then I remember after I was baptized, and it wasn't just being baptized. Some of you out there definitely listening, if you're teens, you're not baptized, and don't use that as an excuse. I was baptized not long after I was called. Once my mind was open to the truth, I wanted to be baptized. But the fact is, and I got to be honest, it may not have been after I was baptized. I think it was. I know it was after, though, my mind was open to the truth, and I was starting to attend to my character more, and I wanted to be more like Jesus Christ. And my mother, again, was sitting in our living room because I was still in, well, no, if I was baptized, I was home from college. It might have been that, but I want to say I might have been in high school, but just attending such things. So I may not have been baptized. But she was watching a Chris Rock special on cable. And I remember he made some crass joke. And I started laughing because there's no rule out there that says somehow our carnal self will never think that crass humor is not funny. And so, yeah, the old man in me, if you will, laughed at that. I thought it was really funny. But then I stopped and I had a different thought in my mind. So whether it's because I was converted and it was God's Spirit in me, or whether it was because I was not yet converted, but God's Spirit was working with me, just as it will with you, young teens out there, and young adults who may not be baptized yet, regardless of what it was, I remember thinking, yes, I think this is funny, but I don't want to think this is funny. I don't want this to be the kind of thing that I laugh at. And I thought to myself, I don't think Jesus Christ is laughing at this. I don't think that he thinks this is hilarious, or on the stage in the millennium, he's going to have Chris Rock on and say, hey, do that raunchy bit that you did on your cable show. And so I made at that time the conscious decision not to listen to it. And I didn't announce it, stand up at my couch and say, Mother, how dare thy viewing is repulsive to me. No, I just found something else to do in the house and kind of got away from it. But here's what I recognize, and I appreciate this insight that I had this at the time, was I recognized that it's not that I needed to wait for God to magically make me think something was entertaining. What I needed was to get away from it and stop feeding it. I recognize that as long as I keep digesting this filthy material and this comedian's act and these kinds of things, I'm I'm going to be built out of this. That is, my body, my brain is going to use that to build me, and it's going to continue to train me to laugh at things that are vulgar. And I don't want to do that. I want to learn, whether it's quickly or over the course of my life. I wanted to learn not to laugh at such things, and so I didn't. And I can't say I've always made the best choices, but I can say I've, from that point on, maybe before that, but at least that point, it taught me to realize, no, I need to try. I need to keep doing this. And over my course of my life, I can say here in my 50s, I've gotten better. It's nice to be able to look back and see some progress. So anyway, it's okay to look for fun, but we have to be careful about how much fun, right? We can't have a life that's just wasted in dissipation on always looking for the next fun thing. We have to keep our limits there. And then also, we have to make sure that what we see as fun is something that's appropriate, that is not something that dishonors God, that we indulge in it, but that we honor him with what we choose to entertain ourselves. And so in another category, I want to highlight education. We're not going to linger on this, but let me just say there's nothing wrong with educational things as entertainment. That might seem strange because maybe the word education is tainted by just being in school and having a teacher talk to you and having homework to take home. But there are a lot of good educational materials out there that we can partake of that help us inform us as better people. You know, Mr. Ames, one of the things I really thought was interesting about him is he would emphasize to the LE students here and there every year, and just in his own personal conversations, about the need to develop your personality. And not just in terms of studying the Bible, but being a more well-rounded person, learning the skills it takes to have conversations with people, to be able to relate an anecdote to someone. My wife and I, and if you went to camp, and if you're teens, you did not experience this. If you're young adults, you may have back at camp when I taught the speech class at camp. And I think they still do some of this in some of the speech classes, and I've appreciated seeing that continue in some. But of course, speech class, you can do a lot of different things. But one of the things I had, and it was a joint idea that Mr. Jonathan McNair and I had. It was kind of a funny thing where he called me once when I was going to a church picnic, and I'd had the same idea independently from him, and he called me on the cell phone, and we both kind of talked about this idea we both had at the same time, which was trying to take advantage of the speech class to help prepare campers to be able to talk to other people in their congregations, to be able to actually have a conversation. If you came to I don't think it was the last one, maybe it was the Charlotte Family Weekend, that was the presentation I gave, was about how to talk to strangers when you're supposed to, not when you're not supposed to. Don't accept offers of candy in a van or anything, but when you're supposed to talk to strangers, like people you haven't met at church. How do you go up to someone you've never met before and talk with them? Well, my wife and I were greatly blessed in our mid-20s, I think, with a book. The book, and I don't know what his modern version does. I think he talks about social media and such as well. I'm not sure. We had the old version of the book, which, oh boy, I'm probably not going to get it right. The author's name was Don Gabor. But then the title was, I think, how to start a conversation and make friends, I think, which sounds, you might think, oh, that sounds so pathetic. Well, hey, if you want to label me as pathetic, feel free. I will take it. All I know is that book was extremely helpful. It was educational. It taught that when it comes to talking to people you've never met before, there are approaches, there are skills that you can actually acquire and that you can incorporate. There's things you can do, concrete things that you can do. And it helped communicate those skills, and it was frankly very educational. Now, what motivated us? Well, my wife and I have heard, and I'm sure many of you have heard over the years, where the ministry would encourage us to try to get out there, and if we see someone new at church that is a guest or someone who might be a brand new person, to take the time to get to know them, to introduce yourself to them, to be friendly. We're the body of Christ. We should be representing Christ to people who come within our walls. Well, my wife and I heard those admonitions, and we'd see a new person and we would just cower because it was scary. We just didn't know what to say. And you've surely been there before, where you're talking with someone. Well, hi, how are you? And they say, oh, I'm fine. Oh, where are you from? Oh, and they say something, and then suddenly awkward silence sets in because you don't know what to say next. And a lot of people would rather jump out a window than experience awkward silence with a stranger. Well, in Don Gabor's book, and I just now looked it up, indeed it is titled How to Start a Conversation and Make Friends. That book helped us through those moments. We actually read the book together and saw that there were practices we could put into place to actually meet people. And really, if you think about it, not just to meet people because our lives are sad and we have to have people in them, but because we want to serve other people. If you can't meet a new person and get to know them, well, you don't expand your circle of friends. You limit your ability to serve people in the congregation to only those people you already know. And the book was helpful. And yes, it was, in a sense, entertainment. That is, we had empty space in our lives where there were no demands being made on us. And instead of watching a movie or instead of listening to a song, we got an educational book. And I tell you, that book has been life-changing in that regard. Now, you might get the book now that I've said it. I'm not saying I'm recommending it for everyone, and maybe you'll be disappointed in it. I tried to boil it down to what I thought were the most fundamental key things in the speech class. But I did get those principles out of that book, and I always try to make sure I gave people credit for that. I'll harken back. I like to say the word harken every once in a while. I'll harken back to my time as a preteen, even, and young teenager. And the TV series Cosmos came out, not the later one, the kind of reboot or refresh or whatever with Neil deGrasse Tyson. Don't even get me started in that direction. But the one from the 80s or early, I think it was early 80s, with Carl Sagan. And man, Carl Sagan is, or was, I believe, an atheist. Maybe he classified himself as an agnostic. It's been a long time since I've looked into that. I think there's some debate about that. But definitely he is not a big believer in terms of an actual intelligent God that's interacting with his world and that created it miraculously. He would consign a lot of that stuff to superstition. And he was definitely pro-evolution. Boy, the series Cosmos almost programmed me to believe in evolution. I probably already did because it was being taught in schools, but definitely it sold it almost like a faith. And that sounds like I'm really being very negative on Cosmos. Well, it was a product of the world, and so you have to be careful again. And it definitely was also teaching some things that we know are not true biblically. So, like if I were watching it with my children today, I think we have watched similar programs. I would interact with them. I try to make sure that they were aware. Because a lot of this, by the way, in the podcast, it's not just about what you personally consume. We have young adults who are listening, who have young children. And so I'm really hoping you will also pay attention to this podcast in terms of thinking of yourself as the driver. When our children are young, we drive their entertainment. We train them what to think is entertaining. We train them concerning what to do with their free time when they're looking for entertainment. In this case, my mom probably saw, and I say my dad too, but I admit it was mainly my mom who was probably running the show there, saw that I had an interest in science. And I would say my dad did too. My dad enjoyed watching sort of PBS, public broadcasting station kind of programs on science. And they saw I had an interest, and they fed that interest. And so we watched Cosmos, and that show gave me such an appreciation for science, even though we got a lot of things wrong. And I wish I'd had parents to help that would know enough to have kind of helped craft me in that way and shape me. But still, it just gave a love for science as this amazing endeavor and the amazing things we could learn. And my mom fed that with other things too. I remember she'd buy me books on science, or I would sometimes see them in a bookstore because my mom loved books. She mainly liked mysteries, but so we'd be in a bookstore and I'd see a science book that I'd like, and she'd get it for me when she could afford it. And so I remember reading about black holes and how light could bend and things like that, and it just really opened my mind and educated me. And so entertainment doesn't always have to be something that's just fun. Yes, we can look for things that are growing our minds. That's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And so we should be open to those forms of entertainment. Again, as long as we keep the other principles in mind. We have to be mindful of what it is, because our mind is going to build itself out of those materials. And then the thing I want to focus on more, and I'm going to bring some scriptures out and actually try to give some examples that might seem sort of high and lofty, like I'm going a bit hoity-toity, but there's a reason why my mind is thinking on such things. And I want to think about focusing on sources of entertainment that are character building. Fun, nothing is truly character neutral in a sense. That is, if it's something we shouldn't be enjoying, it can tear apart our character. If it's something that isn't meant to contribute one way or another to our character, say it's a light diversion, like we mentioned earlier, still, it can have its impact in the sense that if we spend too long with it, that can hurt our character. But I'd like to talk about things that more explicitly address character and those kinds of things as entertainment. And again, that can be music, television, movies, books, even wordless music. I know that I have a playlist on my phone. Boy, I think of that sentence wouldn't even make sense if you go back a certain number of years. But I have a music playlist on my phone that I call my Noble playlist. I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but I populate that and I add to it every once in a while with pieces of music, sometimes wordless, but sometimes not, that just inspire me to think noble thoughts, that put me in a noble frame of mind. And I'll get to why I pick noble in that sense. Because sometimes, I'll give an example. Which movie is it? It's one of the Star Trek movies. It's not a Star Wars movie. It's the soundtrack to Star Trek: The Final Front. No. That's terrible. Not that one. Okay, I can't think of it. But it's the first full length. It's a second full length Star Trek feature that has the cast from Star Trek: The Next Generation. Oh, Star Trek: First Contact. That's it. Not that y'all really care. And this is not a recommendation. You know what? I'm going to feel a little bit too lazy and not get disclaimer guy right now. But I will just say I'm not recommending the movie necessarily. And I can't remember all the details. I remember it's supposed to be mankind's. The Enterprise goes back in time. Spoiler alert. It's tied to mankind's first contact with Vulcans. Again, spoiler alert. But the music by, I think it's Jerry Goldsmith, which is interesting because Jerry Goldsmith, if I recall, he was the one who did the music to the very first Star Trek feature-length movie, Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Was very boring, actually, often called Star Trek: The Motionless Picture. But anyway, or Star Trek: The Slow Motion Picture. But not even the whole soundtrack. I couldn't even tell you what that sounds like. But the beginning of it, the very beginning of the credit sequence, because I'm a soundtrack guy. I do like movie soundtracks. I've had soundtracks I listen to of movies I haven't even seen. But there's something about the beginning of that music that when I listen to it, it resonates with me. It makes me the beginning trumpet flare, which actually is a rendition of the old classic kind of TV show from the 60s, Star Trek music, but it's just a trumpet. I think it's a single trumpet. I'm not sure. But it seems to me like kind of like the call to adventure, and when I say call to adventure, I don't mean like in some crazy adventure. I mean what a young man needs to hear to remind him that there's a greater world out there that he was meant to do something in. That little bit, and then it goes into this sweeping thing that is just I don't know how to put it. It's just a beautiful piece of music, and eventually it starts to get kind of chaotic, and it goes into the actual action of the movie. But it's that first piece, and it inspires me, and it's like I need to start saving things like this, things that put me in a mindset of better and higher things, and so I saved that. If you want something with words, I can give you as an example. It would be the song The Impossible Dream or The Quest from the musical Man of La Mancha. I love that song, and there's multiple performances out there. My daughter-in-law might differ with me here in this regard, but I would not recommend the Josh Groban version. Josh Groban is not performing it in the sense of the play or the musical. He's more just performing it as a Josh Groban song, which the man has an amazing voice. But you go to the more recent performance of really, I'd say a stake in the ground in terms of a quality performance. I think his name is Brian Stokes. I could have his name wrong. amazing voice, just crystal clear, just a beautiful voice to listen to. But even that's not my favorite. And I know I'm sounding picky about these things, but they mean something to me. I've held on to them because they're forms of entertainment that inspire me. But to me, I go back to the original Broadway version by Richard Kiley. Richard Kiley singing The Impossible Dream. It doesn't have quite the I don't know the technical words, baritone. I have no idea, but it doesn't have quite the quality of Brian Stokes. And I hope I'm getting his name right, this fella, because he's fantastic. But there's something about it where it's just a simple night. If you don't know the story of Man LaMancha, he's an old man who, in his looseness of mind, he and his concerns about the world and how terrible it is, he fantasizes that he is a knight and he's going to rectify the wrongs of the world, but he's actually not. He's just kind of an old man, so he's delusional, and that's kind of sad. But at the same time, the person he thinks he is, which is this knight, right, this Don Quixote, is someone whose view of the world is that there should be better things. And the musical is quite a bit different than Cervantes' original work. So for those who are purists out there, I'm not saying it's like Cervantes. I'm literally just talking about the musical. But his view of the world is the world as it should be, and as a man's drives being what they should be. And so that song, The Impossible Dream, it just moves me and inspires me to try harder. And just because a task seems impossible sometimes here in the work, that doesn't mean that we don't try it anyway, right? Maybe God will give us the victory. And anyway, I love that song. And so it's a part of my playlist. There are things in our lives that we might choose as entertainment that are not just fun, not just entertaining, but actually, if they don't build our character themselves, because it takes exercise, applying your character, they at least put us in the mindset that our character is ready to be improved, that we are desirous of improving our character. And part of what has me in the mindset of all this, I have to say, I'd love to figure out a way to do a larger podcast on it, especially with Mr. Robinson. I think that might be fun. But we've been watching these old BBC series based on Jane Austen novels. Mainly it's something my daughter-in-law has introduced us to. It's kind of funny. She'll introduce us to something really great and wonderful, and before our part, we'll probably introduce her to some goofy cartoon. But we watched the one about Emma, the Jane Austen book Emma, and we just recently finished the one on Pride and Prejudice. And yeah, I'm not saying I haven't read the books, so I can't actually speak to the quality of the books. But I will say, and I know there's movies made of these things, and I'm not endorsing any of those. And I'm I think Keira Knightley stars in the movie cinema version of Pride and Prejudice, and I haven't seen those, so I can't even say I've seen them. I can say these BBC series, like 6-part series or so, that they were just really well done. And I know my wife and I have been talking about, we've been actually reflecting on the millennium. Not that was a millennial time in England, to be sure, but still on some of those things that were present in the culture that we've lost in our culture that might be reflected in the millennium. And while the books, some might say they're the ancient, Jane Austen isn't that old, but the old version of rom-coms, romantic comedies, I would say I wouldn't go too far with that, because the romantic comedy genre has gone in particular directions. These were fiction, and they were light in one way, but at the same time, they involved individuals of certain character. And I admit, I kind of wish I'd read some of those as a younger man. Jane Austen did not interest me as a younger man. I had to read some things because of the English honors program in high school, but I don't recall reading any of these in particular. And some of the individuals there I find fantastic. You see character growth, and it's inspiring. So I guess what I want to talk about today is kind of aiming high in some way. That's what I'd like to end with, because I'm going to have some, I'm not ending yet. I've got some scriptures I want to read, and I have some examples I'd like to provide in terms of written material to sort of model what I'm talking about. But some of you might be wondering why I haven't gone to this particular verse yet, but now is the time. I've just been saving it for this, and that is Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8. Now, if you're out there patting yourself on the back thinking, that's what I've been thinking this whole time, Philippians 4 verse 8, well, that's fine, but then keep in mind that means it's in your brain, it's in your heart, it's in your mind, and that you're responsible for that verse. And it's in mine too. And there's times it's chided me and times when it's truly satisfied me when I know I've made a better choice. In Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8, Paul is talking to us, and he talks to all of us. He calls us brethren and says, finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. And don't think of meditation as Easter meditation. He just means the time you spend in your mind, make sure it's on these kinds of things, because this is what will build you in these directions. Who doesn't want to be a person devoted to truth, devoted to what is noble, devoted to the things that are just, a mind that is pure, an outlook that is lovely? Who doesn't want to grow up to be a person of good report or a person of virtue and who is praiseworthy? Well, then again, you become what you consume. You become your entertainment. Then our entertainment, we need to try to fit. We don't. I put that poorly. We need to seek out entertainment that would satisfy Philippians 4:8 to help grow our character. We want to be careful about what we feed into our minds because we become that. And Philippians 4:8 is a guide for such things. I like Proverbs chapter 4 and verse 23, where it talks about being diligent about your heart, because out of it flows the issues of life. We have to be careful with what we choose for entertainment because we are taking it in. The heart doesn't mean literally your pumping organ in that sense. They used it kind of similar to, well, actually they often use kidneys in that sense. But still, there's a reason it's translated heart so often, is because it's talking about your innermost self, the things where the source of your passions, the source of your concerns and your desires and what you think is most important in the world. And the Bible says to take care with that part of yourself, because everything that's in the rest of your life flows out from there. And so how do you take care with a well? Because it uses like a well as a picture. Well, you take care of a well or a pond or something that's a source of water for your life and your community by being careful what you put in it. There's I know of fictional stories where someone discovers that their well has been poisoned, like a dead animal has fallen into a well, or you're trying to defeat an enemy, and so you poison the water in their well. Well, entertainment can be something that improves the quality of our well. We at least don't want to damage the quality of our well, but it can also be something that degrades the quality of that well. And what we take in as entertainment is going to impact our heart. And what flows out of our heart are the issues of the entirety of the rest of our lives. So we want to be careful with that. Actually, Romans chapter 12 gives us an admonition for our lives. And Romans 12 sometimes has been, we have different names for different passages of the Bible. Hebrews 11 we sometimes call the faith chapter. And I've heard of Romans 12 being called a Christian living chapter. It kind of gets serious and but also practical about what we're to be doing with our lives. It says in verse 1 about living our lives as living sacrifices, right? To see our lives in that way. And it's really verse 2 I want to focus on. In Romans 12 and verse 2, we're told, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We're not to try to press ourselves into the mold of the world, but we're to be transformed and to become different than the world. And how do we do that? By the renewing of our mind. And yes, the Holy Spirit plays a big role in that. In fact, we can't be permanently transformed without that Spirit. And yet, that's not the only part of that. And we don't have to wait until we're baptized until we can do that work. We can feed our mind good things, even in our entertainment choices, so that the result is a better mind, a renewed mind, a mind that is ready to be more like Jesus Christ. And the last passage that I will turn to before I look at some examples before we close, and that's in Timothy, like it's just one book, 2 Timothy, and it's an easy passage to remember because it's got a bunch of twos, 2 Timothy 2:22. So if you just remember 2, 2, 2, 2, And then Timothy starts with a T sound. You can remember where this verse is. 2 Timothy 2:22. Admonished, I just made up a word. We're admonished, flee also youthful lusts. Now, you might think, oh yeah, that's an admonition for young people. I'm sorry, but we older people need to do that as well. The world is constantly trying to convince us to pursue youthful lusts. We need to grow up. We need to be moving in a certain direction. And we shouldn't just think of lust here as, say, a carnal sexuality, but this kind of craving for the things that in our lack of wisdom in our youth, we did crave. And he's saying here, flee also youthful lust. It applies to Timothy in particular because he was a young man. But it's more than that. It's more than just fleeing those things. He says to go in a particular direction. If you continue in the verse, he says, but pursue righteousness, faith, love, peace with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. He's admonishing us to a certain fellowship that we should seek. It's not just about what we flee, it's a matter of what we pursue. The word there in verse 22 is to pursue. Same thing with our entertainment. The things that the unwise and the youthful who are going because they're titillating or maybe they're vulgar, get away from those things, but don't stop there. Pursue those things that communicate a sense of righteousness and faith and love and peace. It's a matter of not just what we avoid, it's a matter of what we actively choose. And so I just want to give, before I close, 3 examples of things that have impacted me. How you would encounter these things, I don't entirely know. And I'm not saying you should encounter these things. And they're not, as I'll comment on, they're not a whole hog endorsement of everything these things might be attached to. But all I know is that I don't think a single one of these things, I could be wrong. I'll mention that if I get to it. And each of these happen to be things I've read or speeches I've read. I want to say I came across them over the course of entertainment, that I came across over the course of optional reading, if you will, not necessarily going to the source, but in terms of actually things I were reading that referred to these things. And when I saw the value of these things, I pursued them further. And so, let me talk about that. Well, and actually, before I do that, because again, I'm highlighting the fact that I want to make sure I keep in mind, it's not just that we have teens listening, but also young adults who have young children. Again, you parents need to find a way to inject into the life of your children entertainment that points them in a higher direction. And not just in a higher direction morally, if you will, or with character, but as these examples will illustrate, these are some what we might call highfalutin kind of examples. Some of these are sort of lofty in terms of they're not necessarily easy reading, or they might have been actually, at least one of these things, if not 2 of them, were common in education in earlier days. One of them, I've seen a scene where it's a biography of Winston Churchill, and he quotes one of them from memory. So it used to be a part of education, but we've dumbed things down so much. Mr. Jonathan McNair were in a meeting yesterday talking about how music gets dumbed down. But there were things that were they were rich and they were grand in their structure and in their form of speech. Well, we need to introduce our children to those things too. They need to be pressed in a harder way. Our world and our society is trying to make things so easily digested. It's the equivalent of white bread, so that their minds have to process nothing. But I know some of the things that enriched me the most were things where the writer wasn't as easy to read, where it was a challenge, where the wording might have been a bit even poetic, where the poetry of it, if you will, the structure of it makes it a little harder to understand immediately, but yet actually adds a layer of depth. It adds other, maybe it's symbolism, maybe it's the way that words rhyme, maybe it's the meter of the words that actually made it a more valuable thing for me to read. Anyway, that said, this is not just for people looking for things as examples of, say, loftier things, but also for parents that are trying to find what are things I want to expose my children to. So these things have an impact on me. One is a poem by Rudyard Kipling. And some of you know who Rudyard Kipling is. You might be familiar with the Jungle Book. He's the one who wrote that, not the Disney version of it. You could say they adapted the Jungle Book, but adaptation just seems like a loose word there. But he wrote this poem called "If," and there's some things he's going to say here that I don't recommend for sure. But at the same time, the overall message of it had an impact on me, and I wish I had actually had it earlier in my life. So I'm going to read this poem, If, by Rudyard Kipling. And for those who are professional poetry readers out there, forgive me for probably not doing the best of jobs. So here's If by Rudyard Kipling. He says, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same. If you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken, and stoop and build 'em up with worn-out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there's nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And, which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Kipling is just amazing. He was such a talent. And that poem just it's contrast of these things where if you can do this, but not too much do that. If you can be in these circumstances, but not actually fall to the temptations they bring. And like I said, I don't recommend everything. Pitch and toss is actually gambling, where people would throw coins up against the wall and keep the whole kittle. We don't recommend that. But his point is still good. If you can if you can really risk something and then lose it all, but then not complain, just be willing to start over. It's a rich poem, and I remember talking with, I mentioned it to my sons. I think I read it to them, and I'll give credit. I don't know if the other boys did this too. I had to apologize, but I'll give credit to my oldest, Jonathan. It really resonated with him. I remember he told me once that he had memorized it. I don't know if he was asked to memorize it, or maybe they had to memorize something and that's what he picked. But yeah, he actually memorized the whole poem, and I really admire that, because I didn't have that kind of a conviction when I was younger to find something so worthwhile and to literally commit it to memory. But I return to that every once in a while. Even here I am at 54. I go and I return to that because it's something well said, and it's not just well said, it says something valuable. There are things that aren't valuable in the world that sometimes are terrible, but people say them with great art. And there are also worthwhile things that are said, but they aren't said with any particular kind of art that makes them land differently. And Kipling's If is one of those that does both. So anyway, there's one example. Another I will read is the name of it. Oh boy, I don't have the whole name. I ought to look it up. It's a famous poem, and by Thomas Babington Macaulay. And I'm definitely not going to read the whole poem. It's famous for a particular scene, and I can't think of the name of the whole poem, but the part that most people tend to read that we enjoy the most is the poem where it talks about, that's the name, but it's called Lays of Ancient Rome. He was not a Roman himself, but it's kind of different parts of Roman history, etc. But he writes this in this poem, and in particular, he's talking about this attack on Rome in its earlier days. And there's this part where it highlights a particular person named Horatius. I give some background. Where did I get this background? I can't remember where I took this. I want to give credit to where I took it. Let's see. A website, thoughtco.com. That's where I got this summary. But it says the story of Horatius is described in Plutarch's The Parallel Lives in the early 6th century BC. Lars Porsena was the most powerful king in Etruscan Italy, who Tarquinius Superbus asked to help him take back Rome. Porsena sent a message to Rome saying they should receive Tarquin as their king. And when the Romans refused, he declared war on them. And Publius Valerius Publicola was the consul of Rome, and he and Lucretius defended Rome until they fell in battle. So eventually the battle fails. But here in the midst of the story, there's a character, Horatius Cocles, which is it's apparently the word Cyclops because he had lost an eye in a previous war. He was the keeper of the gate of Rome, and anyway, you gotta. I'm not gonna tell the rest. You're gonna see the story, but I'll just read just this part, and this is a part from Babington's, Macaulay's poem, and it's often just called Horatius at the Gate. And it's got some paganism in it. I'm going to highlight that because I'm trying to talk about how you can take something that may have some of these elements, and it's important to recognize, hey, we don't believe in multiple gods. We don't believe in, pagan temples, if you will. But just kind of like we talk about certain generals, we talk about Patton or we talk about MacArthur, we're not endorsing, say, a warlike mentality. We're trying to highlight those things that are valuable and noble. And there's something in this that spurs a certain masculine tendency, I feel. And so they recognize at this point in the poem, there's this massive army that is coming, and they don't know what to do. But they recognize that, well, if we destroy the bridge, that will slow them down. They won't be able to get into the city, at least not easily. The problem is, given where the army is, they realize that there's just not enough time. They do not have enough time to destroy that bridge. So then we get to the part here in the poem. And so it says, but the consul's brow was sad, and the consul's speech was low. And darkly looked he at the wall, and darkly at the foe. Their van will be upon us before the bridge goes down, and if they once might win the bridge, what hope to save the town? Then spoke. Then out spoke brave Horatius, the captain of the gate. To every man upon this earth death cometh soon or late. And how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods, and for the tender mother who dandled him to rest, and for the wife who nurses his baby at her breast, and for the holy maidens who feed the eternal flame, to save them from false Sextus that wrought the deed of shame? Hew down the bridge, Sir Consul, with all the speed ye may. I, with 2 more to help me, will hold the foe in play. In yon straight path 1,000 may well be stopped by 3. Now who will stand on either hand and keep the bridge with me? Then outspoke Spurius Lartius, a Romnian proud was he. Lo, I will stand at thy right hand and keep the bridge with thee. And outspoke strong Herminius, of Titian blood was he. I will abide on thy left side and keep the bridge with thee. Horatius, quoth the consul, as thou sayest, so let it be. And straight against that great array forth went the dauntless 3.
I know I tried to read that with some drama there, but just naming these guys the Dauntless Three. I mean, who doesn't want to have a life where you might acquire a name, with as the Dauntless Three? Well, so yeah, there's heathenism in that. Please do not, when it comes to the temples of multiple gods, no, that's not worth any kind of sacrifice for. But at the same time, there's elements about that do feed a certain element of character. It mentions, for instance, his idea that how can a man die better knowing that his death was serving the land of the ashes of his fathers, and if you will, the temple singular of our God. Because there are men in our church history. I'm not talking about going to war. I'm talking about men that laid down their lives for the sake of the body of Christ. And getting that message out, and the fact, the ashes of our fathers. You might think, oh, that's not really, who really cares about where your fathers are buried? Well, I admit that's a modern tendency. That's the way we think now. Regrettably, is that we don't care about such things. It's definitely very American. But you know what? It's not necessarily the way God thinks. God wanted lands to stay in families forever. He cared about those family lines. And if you look at Nehemiah, I think it's Nehemiah chapter 2, where news concerning the state of Jerusalem. Nehemiah is a captive. He's the cupbearer of the king, and news of the state of Jerusalem has reached his ears, and he's sad, and he can't control the fact that he looks sad. So he appears before the king, and the king notices that he's sad, which when you're the cupbearer, it's definitely not healthy for you to look sad. So the king asks him what's going on, and Nehemiah is open with him, and he's honest, and he says, "How can I be?" I'm paraphrasing. How can I be anything but sad, knowing that the gates of the city are burnt and down, and the land where the tombs of my father are lies in ruin? It meant something to him. And there's nothing wrong with that. And in this poem, even though it's written, from the perspective of heathens, it means something, to me. In fact, even the last part, the very last part where it talks about, and straight against that great array forth went the dauntless three. Even that prompts me to think of biblical things. There's a passage in Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 1. Proverbs 22 and verse 1. It says, "A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold." Having a good name means something. It doesn't mean we would go out to try to gain honor for our names, but having a good name, one that our children will be proud of, and teaching our children to try to do with their lives so that their children and grandchildren and great grandchildren have something that when they hear their ancestors' name, they smile about that. That means something. And so that might have been kind of highfalutin, but it means something to me. Okay, we're here at the hour mark for sure, so I'm going to wrap up quickly. I'm going to give just the last example, and that is what's frequently called the man in the arena. It's a speech by Theodore Roosevelt, and he didn't call it that. That's only a small part of his speech. He was actually traveling in Paris at the time when he gave this speech on April 23rd in 1910, and it's just magnificent. The whole speech I cannot speak to because this is the only part that I tend to focus on, and it's often called the man in the arena. And if you haven't heard it, you need to hear it because it really does speak to important values. So here it is. This is Theodore Roosevelt. He says, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again because there's no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." It is a remarkable piece of writing. And let me, side note, I can't help it. how many of us actually see any current politicians speaking in this kind of mode? Personally, I do not see that. This is the kind of lofty speech that we once expected of leaders, of people. So anyway, with this, it's just remarkable. And it inspires me that it better to try than to fail automatically by not doing so. I love this passage, and I do return to it from time to time because it reminds me that not to be foolhardy. He's not trying to say go out and do something stupid and dangerous. If something is stupid, then doing it doesn't make it not stupid. So keep that in mind. He's not trying to say take unnecessary risks. You're not brave for doing something stupid. You're just stupid. However, there are valuable things worth doing in the world. There are things worth trying. There are great things for the sake of serving others, for the sake of building a foundation for your life. And yes, we fail sometimes, but there's great good in the doing of it. And don't listen to the people who are just sitting at a distance and telling you how you could have done it better and you should do it. Now, there are people that give wise advice we should listen to, but not just the critics who are unwilling to do those things themselves. I'll be upfront. We get that in the work sometimes. We have people, man, I've been doing the telecast now for not quite 20 years, a little more than 18 years. And over the course of those 18 years, we've had, elders leave the church here and there from time to time and have their own ideas about how the work ought to be done. You should be doing this or that. And then you look, and what do? So often they go out there and they do nothing themselves. They do nothing themselves. They've spent a lot of time saying how it should be done. You should be doing this. You should be doing that. And then they go out and they do absolutely nothing. And I will give full credit to examples we have in the church, to Dr. Roderick Meredith, to Mr. Gerald Weston, to the late Mr. Richard Ames, because rather than sit in the cheap seats and complain about how the work should be done, they'd rather be in the arena, getting their nose bloodied and trying to do it. And that is honorable before God. You will not take up a worthy endeavor and not make mistakes. But that doesn't make the endeavor not worth doing. All the more, do challenging things, do hard things. So anyway, those are just personal examples for me in terms of things I've come across that are technically sources of entertainment that are they're lofty, they're higher than what I normally consume, frankly, in terms of entertainment, but they're things I come back to again and again because I want to feed my brain the things that will make me a better me. And yes, that's certainly the Bible, but even the things outside of the Bible, I want to make those kind of choices. So let me leave things to you. What are the things that your parents enjoy that they feel lift them up? If you're a teen, talk to them and find out. Even if you're a young adult, talk to your parents, talk to your grandparents, talk to your ministers, talk to people in the congregation. What are the things in their lives that lift them up, that really inspire them and make them want to be better people? Those are worthwhile conversations to have. And if you're young parents, begin collecting those things and plan to make them a part of your child's mental diet as they grow. One of the resources I enjoyed as a younger parent, I didn't read all of them with my kids, but I read some of them, was a book called Amazing Tales for Making Men Out of Boys by Neil Oliver. And what I liked about those tales is not all the guys in that succeeded. It talks about these great men that did challenging things. Not all of them were really perfect men, to be sure. They're real life examples. And some of them dared greatly and failed. They're explorers trying to reach the polar extremes. There's warlords here and there, oddly. But I loved books like that, and they were written at a level that were accessible to them, but with stories that definitely are a bit different. If you're going to try something like that, it's not a wholehearted endorsement. You have to look at it and make sure it's going to work for your kiddos. But at the same time, if you're young parents, don't just settle for what the world wants to feed your children. Don't just settle for what's easy to feed them. Plan on designing your child's mental diet. Feed their minds with things of value, because those things will be what they become. And if we start early, we can help them cultivate a taste for the best of things, the things that fit Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8.
Smith and Robinson.